Imagine booting up Counter-Strike and loading into a game to see this. We don't think of it as some sort of joke, but this was the reality for your average gamer in the late 90s to early 2000s. At a time when computers looked like this, and a third of the US population still used dial-up, mapping in Counter-Strike mainly consisted of a bunch of blocky brushes and a handful of brush-like props. But being done in the Gold Source engine, this was the best people could do. Fast forward to today's Source 2 engine, and we have things like meshes, PBR materials, hotspot texturing, smart props, parallax-corrected cube maps, paintable water, 3D bullet decals, and those are just the things I can think of from the top of my head. The point is, mappers are now able to do much more than they could 20 years ago. And because of that, maps like Inferno went from looking like a generic set of rooms and corridors to a recognizable Italian town filled to the brim with detail. Which leads to the subject of this video. While once technologically restrained in how much detail could be included in levels, Source 2's tolerance for a seemingly infinite amount of it raises an issue that can be highlighted in this Twitter thread. This video, posted by Eddie Veery on October 4th, showcases 11 different spots that he believes should be quote-unquote decluttered to increase player visibility. And at the time of this recording, several of these spots have actually taken notice by Valve and received updates, with the biggest changes revolving around a site. The first major change was to Library, which is actually a winery now. At launch, we had this long wine rack holding 12 barrels. Now, there are 3 boards leaned up against them. Interestingly, if you look behind them, you'll notice that one of the barrels is gone. In fact, it now sits on top of this other one and is in the process of being crated. Before this change, you could actually climb up here, which gave you this angle towards CT spawn. But now, it's just a sight to behold. And speaking of sight, that's why these boards were added. The complaint was that looking into Library from farther away was too distracting and that players would often blend in with the barrels behind them. I have some before and after comparisons here, so I'll let you decide if that was the case. The next big change is just outside of Library with this garage door. It used to be much more open with an arch along the top. Now it's rectangular like the other garage doors on the map and about 2/3 of the way closed. Unlike the change to Library, which was made to improve player visibility alone, this change seems to accommodate for other things as well. For instance, you used to be able to spam through these walls quite easily with rifles, but with this new door, it's now only possible with the op. There was also an issue with grenades where if you try throwing one like this, it'd bounce off. While this clipping still exists in the newest version, it's no longer an issue since there's no longer a reason to throw a nade below the door. The last major change is this railing on balcony. It's been disassembled and tucked into this corner alongside a toolbox, replacing this ladder. This change allows you to enter pit without having to jump, which should make fighting out of apps much easier. The removal actually makes a lot of sense considering the fact that the adjacent room is already under construction. So nothing seems out of place cosmetically, just like with the other changes. There are several less notable changes, including around Boiler, Cubby, and Banana, all of which strictly reduce the amount of detail, which raises the following question: are these changes good or bad? In the Twitter thread, there is no shortage of people complaining about Eddie's suggestions and some of the changes that Valve has made to the map presumably in response to them. Their argument is that these changes ruin the map's immersion. But others argue that since Counter-Strike is a competitive game, details and immersion come second to gameplay. It's an interesting dilemma we find ourselves in because 20 years ago, Counter-Strike just didn't have this problem. Back then, your maps would never have enough detail, but now they can have too much? What's the right balance, and who should we listen to? Unfortunately, this isn't as simple as OniPixel unboxing 2 NIP papers, but I think there are some important things we should all consider. For one, we have to acknowledge that Counter-Strike is a competitive game and that being able to distinguish players from the environment does matter. But at the same time, you don't want to end up with a map that's flat and boring. The details need to look good and provide immersion without throwing players off. So with all of this in mind, is Valve making the right changes? In some cases, I'd say yes. In my opinion, this change to Library is a great example of increasing visibility into an area that is often glanced at for a matter of milliseconds. And Valve was able to preserve most of the detail and immersion by giving a reason for these wooden boards being here, just like they did with how they disassembled the railing on balcony. However, I can't say that I agree with some of the other changes, like outside of Boiler and Cubby. In my opinion, there's almost no difference in visibility when comparing a player crouched in these positions before and after the patches. Yes, they're at least a little easier to see, but was it worth removing the detail? The hardest case for me is this one by Banana. I'll admit that in the old version, a crouching terrorist is pretty difficult to see, and in the new version, he's a little less hidden. But why was this window removed? And would this spot really make that much of a difference in a competitive environment? Again, I'll leave that up to you. There's no doubt that Valve is going to change the map even more, and perhaps some of the changes will be warranted, but I urge them to exercise caution with how they adjust the details on the map, because at the end of the day, the desire for those details are what brought Counter-Strike to Source 2 in the first place. Thank you for watching. This is LED, switching off.